Welcome to Conscious Eye, living in authentic connection and harmony with self, others, and the world, featuring Ravi and Savitri. We get to this point where who says good morning first? So I will start. Good morning,
Right.
Ravi.
Good morning, Savitri.
And today is a big day, a really big day in the United States. And
Mm.
our topic today just seems to blend right into what's happening. Maybe taking a little different spin on it, but maybe digging in a little deeper when we spin through that.
Taking another look, maybe looking through another lens.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Mm.
Mhm.
And so this is coming out on the 28th of March, which is a day in which many people are organizing and coming together, um, uniting together, um, to make ourselves heard about how we feel about the present state of our leadership here in the United States.
Mhm.
There's a lot wrapped up into that. I think,
Yes, there is certainly. Mhm.
I think that's what makes, at least from folks that I see who seem not to understand the movement. Um, it's when there's so much going on that is impacting so many different groups, I believe, coming together to organize our voices to be heard about how we feel. It encompasses all of us, women who are, wanting to be heard about having autonomy over their own bodies, uh, voices that are wanting to be heard about potentially having major threats to their right to vote. Then we have our friends who are suffering under the siege of ICE agents and their communities. And now all of us are seeing more of a presence of that force in more public spaces. There's war raging in a land far away that can seem unrelated to our own daily lives, but the pain and suffering that we're causing in other places weighs heavily on a lot of our hearts. So there's so much going on in the world, not to mention still the voices of victims who haven't been heard, or believed or appropriately tended to, um, in regards to abuses that they have survived. So there's so many layers, and the purpose of today is just to speak out, be heard, and to speak up about our topic today, really essentially, which is betrayal and deceit.
And it's really interesting how the universe has guided us to this topic today because we had it on the list. And when we
Mhm.
chose it a few weeks ago to have it posted today, I don't think either one of us really made the connection of what would have been happening today and the topic until this morning when we started just
Mhm.
briefly doing our overview like we always do. We get a little chatty about the topic and then we stop ourselves because we realize that this is something we'd like to share with everyone. And that whole concept of betrayal and deceit really does factor into um, one of the intentions why people are coming together, because some people feel like there's been a lot of deception in addition to all of the overt things that you just described, which there are probably many more that we're not privy to on a regular basis, or maybe certain pockets of the nation are experiencing something a little bit differently. But overall, those are the big hitters. And the concept of betrayal at a collective level is huge. And recently, even within the last couple of weeks, we're seeing that some of um, the edges to the overt actions you were describing are starting to broaden and reach out to different cultural groups in ways, either through the courts or on the streets. And this is the way the behaviors that are grounded in betrayal and deceit that seems to be an opportunity for some in power to utilize in a way to manipulate the rhetoric and come into their sense of security of being able to be the be all end all in the power structure. But once it starts trickling down, it goes out to include other micro cultures that aren't part necessarily of the large umbrella that you just described, but they are microcultures of that large umbrella. And so different cultural groups now are starting to experience things that are scary, dangerous, uh, borderline terrorist type of activities. And they're thinking, we're seeing some posts saying, well, we never thought that they would come to do that, or not. And others will respond, they'll come for whoever they happen to have a particular bias against. So
It's
once it gets
it's
started, it's tough to control.
Well, right. It's those subcultures of the norm umbrella, which what is that? The perceived norm umbrella that feel it first. And you can ignore that so long as you're, not under that umbrella and it doesn't, I mean, it's that whole, we all know the quote, they came for, and finally they came for me. We all know that. But are you blind to that in your own life still? If you are, maybe something to think about. And I would be remiss to leave out the LGBTQ plus community, who also is under siege in certain states, more so than others, but we all feel that. And if you're not feeling that, I encourage you to maybe expand your community and get involved in your community and the people who live in it, because these are our neighbors and our friends. Um, and, the folks who make a community a thriving community. We all belong, and we all deserve space to belong. And there are those of us who live in a lot more privilege, and privilege is just, really not having to think about this, that, or the other thing that is going on, because it does not impact you or on a day-to-day basis. We don't have to wait until it impacts us to take action and to go out and support our community. In fact, I'll be doing that a little later today as I go take part in a rally, and we'll be using our voices to sing together and to come together and unite under one, voice, one bringing us back together under that umbrella, not, um, the norm, but welcoming everybody and anybody and everybody from different walks who believe that everybody deserves to be able to live in authenticity and to be able to do that safely, So we talked about an episode 30, our episode Loyalty and Authenticity, about, what it is to live authentically. And that's really living in alignment with your true self. We started this podcast to talk about, um, you know, our dharmic purpose and path. And what is that? Well, that's living in alignment with your true self. We mentioned the study of phenomenology, this idea that your experience is your truth. But we've also talked about many times how that truth doesn't extend beyond self to others to the point of harm or yeah, what's the word I'm looking for? Forming everyone else into the mold that we want to make them. That's ego. Um, that's that's not allowing others to express their authentic nature. So, um, as we talked about loyalty and authenticity and we see what's going on. I think a lot of times we think of betrayal and deceit or loyalty and authenticity, those types of things, especially betrayal and deceit with our interpersonal relationships, how we interact with others, especially maybe intimate relationships or intimate partners. But really, when we look at it at a collective level, where are we seeing this emerge in our lives? And also, how do we allow how do we betray ourselves? How, where are we maybe allowing ourselves to be misled in ways if we're not really tuned in to what's going on around us?
Yeah, and I think in that episode you talked about loyalty to the higher mind and to
Hmm.
our internal value system, our soul, um, and that is the dharmic path. There are so many ways to look at this, and one thing about betrayal is that often it is perceived by the receiver, but not necessarily intended by the individuals or the groups that put something into place or change their actions or their speech in a way that another person might feel betrayed. So, thinking about it on a one on one relationship, that also happens at a more collective level. That is a problem with trust, then. And when the leadership feels self-righteous or they're busy protecting themselves in a way that causes harm to others, then they start demanding the social conformity in order to create a safety net for them to continue to operate in their own autonomy. The interesting thing, that's where that conflict comes with democracy, in that when we have an individual who has usurped the trust, has begun actions that from their perspective might just be, you know, survival of themselves, because we know there's some things that are hidden or want to be avoided from certain leaders. Uh, that, though, is perceived by the people who hired these individuals as a betrayal to the system and betrayal to their trust that was provided. So it gets really complex when we start looking at it at a sociological perspective, at the collective level. But we can kind of distill it down to what happens between just a couple of people when their value systems may mostly align, but then there's this little bit over here that isn't exactly in sync. And that's where we find misunderstandings, where someone's belief system or authentic self is just slightly out of sync. Then what do we do? How do we manage that piece in a relationship without feeling betrayed or feeling like that person was deceitful because maybe they didn't share it before. And then suddenly, in the case of a marriage or a long term relationship or friendship, after 10, 15 years, suddenly you find out about this thing. And how you have a whole new world ahead of you now to work with that new information. So getting down into the weeds a little bit really helps us, I think, look up and think about how we can come together, which is what's happening today, in a way that those little pieces that are maybe out of sync, we'll just put them over here for now because we have a very large piece of who we are that are united and are speaking one voice. And in some ways, we just need to let those little things go for now and focus on the big picture. So I can't wait to hear about how your own effort that you're doing. You're doing a singing effort, I think, right? You were telling me about it the other day.
Yes, we'll be using song in our gathering today, communal song singing, which I think is just, it moves people in a different way. It moves all of us in a different way. It moves through us in a different way, that level of frequency. And it's just, we see, of course, and we sing in churches and you look at, uh, just that it's a way of coming together and uniting in literally in one voice and one frequency. So I think it's a very powerful way to come together. Um,
Okay.
so it's interesting how you mentioned, we can be slightly out of sync in someone's frequency, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what we do with that, how loyal we are to someone or where we are in our relationship with that person or that group can determine how impactful that slight dissonance is,
Mm-hmm.
if you want to call it that, being
Mm-hmm.
slightly out of sync. Now, if we continue to, let's say it's a high value, intimate relationship where there's something that I learn of that's out of sync or that feels out of sync, is it something I'm ignoring that I, am unquestioning, or not looking at fully? Or is it something that we can find mutual respect through and be faithful, through that? Same thing in groups, or we in our culture, in our society, in the collective, am I blindly loyal to an effort? Or am I thinking critically about it and making sure that there's resonance along the way? And when I feel that dissonance, am I addressing it so that that's discernment. And that can help us, I don't want to use the word protect ourselves, but be aware of when betrayal or deceit is happening. So betrayal, we might feel betrayed, like you said, when that's maybe not the intention of the other person, but there is then a violation of trust, a violation of confidence, or of moral standard that does need to be addressed. And if we can't both come to a mutual or all, or the collectively come to a mutual understanding and a way to move forward respectfully, we may not be a part of that group or pattern anymore. And, again, you may be, or when we think largely at this administration, are you waking up to some, you know, a malalignment? Are we, do you see more of that? Just sit with it, process it for a minute, sit with it and see, does that feel resonant with me or is there dissonance there? Um, and where could I better align are my values better aligned? Where do they fit best? Because I think there's a lot of folks who, and any of us could be feeling this way at some point where I didn't think it was this way. I've been aligned with this group or with this person or with these values for a very long time. And as they shift, am I able to shift myself with them, or am I going to try to remain aligned with an idea that maybe no longer fits, that is no longer resonant in that way? And that may be because of misrepresentation, purposeful misrepresentation.
Right.
There's a lot of that out
Sabotage
there,
or
right?
manipulation. Yeah.
Or omission, or concealment, the deceit that's coming in. So, it's it's just, I find it interesting when you said, we feel there's something slightly out of sync. We can come together. We can discern that those ways in which we're out of sync, we can come together through in mutual understanding, respect, and be faithful to the higher cause. Um, but on the flip side, on the other end of that spectrum, maybe that is the dissonance that's causing you to move away or towards something, away from something and towards something different that feels more aligned. Sometimes those are hard decisions to make because we've been in one space for so long and it feels so comfortable and we want to stay there. But if it's feeling dissonant and it's no longer feeling resonant, it is also a signal that, again, to move away from that or towards something that is in better alignment with where we are and what our values are and where our loyalties do really lie.
Yeah. And it's almost a matter of percentages. What's the percent of that dissonance versus the harmony? And because something can be a very small percentage. You have all these things that align, but this one, even though it's doesn't appear to be very impactful, the actual intention or the belief system or the action or the speech that's maybe was hurtful, it's a deal breaker. So you might have all this unity over here, but this one thing, for whatever reason, takes on a more intensive response from the individuals. What's kind of interesting about what's happening with the collective is that we have so much of the percent of our um, social structure and our governmental structure right now that for a very large number of people, more than half of the United States likely, if you just go back to the voters and then the ones that didn't vote, you don't know, but we can assume that bottom line is it's 50-50 or a little more one way or the other. That's that's a huge number of individuals to be out of sync with the way things are occurring. And for those that may think, oh, it's not such a big deal, they're not really impacting me, like you mentioned earlier, that adage of, until they come for me. Uh, it won't hit until then. And even though your cultural group or the reason that suddenly the spotlight's on us, you or them, whoever it happens to be, is not maybe a very large group, it's a deal breaker suddenly because now it's taken on a very big impact for us. So that's not very profound to talk about it that way. But I think about a time that um, as I was growing up, here comes the personal story, right? My dad had strong loyalties, and his generation had strong loyalties to a particular brand, a particular company, their favorite restaurant, their best friends. And when they got glued into those things, they were there for life. You know, I'm not sure how many people retire these days now with a 30 or 40-year tenure at one particular place that they worked. I'm sure there's still quite a few. But for that generation, that was the norm. I mean, you made a choice, you gave your loyalty, and it was 100%. So when I think about how that played out in our family and with his brothers and sisters and my mother's brothers and sisters and all of the extended cousins and so forth, he was very adamant about we're family, so my job has this particular focus and brand. And why am I coming to your house and seeing the competitor in the kitchen? And there would be lots of conversations about that
Mhm.
that I can remember at different times. And I'm not sure we would go there now that way. That's a whole nother world. But just bringing that memory back as far as it being a very intensive strand of loyalty, which doesn't allow for change, is
Mhm.
socially conformative, and it's a mandated conformity in some ways. In that way, it was. So, in when we think about where we are today, there are different opportunities. And I think there may be some of you out there listening to this laughing, thinking, oh my gosh, what that must have been like. The cousins that all just like, we're going outside, see you later, let the adults work it out. But yeah, so that
Well,
that was loyalty in the days when
that's a
I.
good example of, yeah, that, dare I say, I mean, generational gap,
It was.
right? So
Mhm.
there's not to say that I do think every generation has, in some way, shape, or form, its loyalty. Your ego is tied to something. That's all it is, right? Your ego is tied to something, and you identify with that now. And so, we're going to stand on that ground until it crumbles beneath us at times, if that's the hill you want to die on. I think our culture at that time was more apt to support that level of loyalty, that kind of loyalty. We don't live in that stability, economic stability anymore. So
Right.
it's more difficult to become that loyal to a brand or a business or an organization. Now, of course, you still have your huge hitters, you know, Coke versus Pepsi or whatever it may be, for
Mhm.
just as a silly example, but it could be, looking at our military branches and, wanting to stand on this hill that we fight for freedom always and no matter what. And if that is the paradigm that you live in, if that is the hill that you are standing on, you may die on that hill. You may not be able to shift that paradigm to align with the current reality and see what it really means and what impact it's really having on the world. And so the more we can have those conversations and bring to light what is happening, just observation, just can we observe without judgment, um, together, and just sit with what we see and hear, and can we take the time to process how it makes us feel before we make a decision that I'm going to stand in this or stand on that just because I always have. That's
Right.
the challenge, because it is those distortions and mental blocks that keep us tied to a specific form. A thought, an idea is also a form, and that is our ego. And then we have suffering. We're clinging to what feels good, or we're clinging to um, really the ignorance of what is our true nature, which is coming together in unification and the benefit of all. And I think if we look, we talked about some of the how can we see this? We go back to the teachings that we have. Um, you know, what is being taken that is not freely given? you
Mm-hmm.
know, that's stealing. And are we going to continue to allow that or do that if we're the one doing it? Um, or are we going to really let our soul come through, sit time, spend time, and can we find gratitude in what we have and um, kind of balance that scale? That's just an example. But there's so again, circling back to where we started today, there are so many social issues that are impacting so many people. It can be overwhelming to think about, much less, if you're in those intersections of reality, it can be a really heavy time just to move through the world today. So, do what is necessary to soothe your nervous system, to spend time in quiet with yourself and find that loyalty within. Recognize where there's betrayal and deceit, and where you might want to realign um, with in the collective ways where you can be supported. Um, I think that's, what I think it's easy to get lost in the overwhelm of all the things that we see in the news that are so negative. But when you're out in your community, if you show up and stand together in your community, there's still a lot of places where you can find support, where you can find belonging, where you can find allies. And those are the places where we need to go and come together and be. And
And
some,
that
and
creates safety. Hmm.
yes, yes. And then of course, balancing that with the time to spend in quietude with your own mind, so that you can rejuvenate your soul and your spirit. Because it's heavy times out there. There's a lot out there in the Maya, but one of the points of suffering is avidya, the ignorance of our true nature, that all of this is temporary. So if we can remember that this too shall pass and remember that joy is a form of resistance and reclaim our joy and reclaim our connection with each other, with nature, we can find some greater peace.
And then if you do take a particular statement that someone made or an action or behavior, and that's that personal part where you're receiving something because everyone perceives things differently through Maya. And if the opportunity doesn't come up to have a dialogue around it, or you choose to avoid it, then it kind of festers and does its own thing. But you know, how do we recoup after, as a receiver, you feel betrayed, or you feel like something or someone or some bodies, lots of them, have been deceitful or have betrayed you? That we all go through that. That's something we learn as we come through life. As a child, you more likely feel betrayed more often. So, how do you begin to do what you were talking about? Discern and say, okay, was that really the way it happened? What role did I play in this? And depending on what the answers to some of those discerning questions might be, then you have the opportunity to control your own response to it. And it can live within and, like I said, fester away. Or it may be, as you realize, not exactly as you perceived it, that it was just someone living their life, doing their thing, and it just happened to be that one little piece that was out of alignment at that moment. Or it might have been something done with full intention in a deceitful way to cause a betrayal, in which case, a little double whammy there. But at the same time, um, that is where the discernment comes in, and you decide,
Yeah.
how much energy do I want to put into this, and where do I
Right.
want to remain or walk away? Yeah,
Yes, at least like you said, when we can see that with clarity, then we can be discerning and make that choice and respond rather than react. And as we get more practiced in walking away from those things that are harmful for us and are not meant for us, we learn to, and we'll get into this more in our next episode, but learn to trust, better our own intuition so that we can avoid those stickier situations in the future. All this work that we are doing all the time, that we're talking about is what, we have talked about. So if folks haven't listened to especially the more recent episodes, 31 and 32, I believe we said,
that's right.
threshold of change, you know, the eclipses, the new year, the moon cycles, of course, all the transits, and we'll have another one coming up in our next episode. They help bring us into a greater understanding of ourselves. They highlight the areas that we may not always see about ourselves that allow us to come into greater loyalty to ourselves and our own authentic nature. That's why we're here, why we talk about those, and also help us stop or notice when we're betraying and deceiving ourselves or getting into situations where we allow others to betray or deceive us. So, again, I invite you to go back and listen to those episodes and maybe check in on those patterns in your life where we can choose different responses and move into greater safety and security and peace and joy and into that more nurturing collective.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, all of the ways that we would be discerning about what we feel is our value system and how the external world, living or non living, impacts us, we also might want to look at our intentions and motivations as far as,
Yeah.
are we keeping secrets? Is that considered deceit when we choose not to share? Some things maybe, some things maybe not. Are we in acts of betrayal, knowingly or unknowingly? So it works both ways, so that we're not always perceiving it as being the one that it happens to, either from the
No, no,
cosmos and the
we
eclipse.
don't want to go into that, the shadows of ourselves and take responsibility now, do we?
Yes, I think so. We
Like,
do a little bit.
wait a minute.
That's the
I'm
hard
starting to
work.
feel the pressure. I'm starting to turn that finger around now. So we'll just put the brakes on that. Definitely,
And
though,
that's what
definitely.
happens, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
there's real-time example of I may not want to look at that so closely. And we'll talk about that. And yeah, as that comes up in our next episode, a little more too, we get a little more into that shadow side. I just had to jump in there and
Of
yeah, no,
course,
it
of
gets
course.
hard.
Yeah.
That's when it gets hard.
Hmm.
So yeah, definitely we'll cover, well, we'll have to peel away a layer of that onion in our next episode and go a little deeper into that.
Yeah, yeah.
Because
Well, this has
that's
been
part of our work too.
mhm. This has been an interesting morning. Prior to us getting together on this podcast, and I'm sure it'll continue to be very interesting with lots of messages, activities, ahas, and we'll just
Yeah.
walk safely and collectively through this day.
Yeah. And, go back, listen to a couple of those episodes, notice where those patterns may be playing out in your life, how you're integrating new information or shifting into a new way of being after we've left that eclipse portal. And we do have another one coming up in August, but there's some things going on in between that we'll be able to use to help us get through different times, energy shifts that may be coming up. So we do look forward to seeing everyone again next week. And don't forget, something that I don't think we mentioned very often, you can always practice with us together on Thursdays from 7 to 7:30 Central Time. That's a free offering. You can click the link in my socials that goes to our free Thursday meditation, explore meditation. So, we do want to set aside time to be in quiet with ourselves to get us through these very intense times. So that's just one way that you can do
Yes.
it. We talk a lot about practice, and that's just a standing offer for anyone who's listening. You can always join us just by, going through a couple of clicks links in our bios. I know it's in
And
mine.
in the description of each episode, there's a website, and that website takes you right to the registration link of the schedule for the Thursday night meditation. It's Central Time. We're on Central
Yes.
Daylight, by the way. So it'd be 7 p.m. and it's 9 years in the making, 9.5 pretty soon. And still continuing and loving it every single week. We have various
Yes.
people lead the meditations, so you get kind of a nice menu of options. Some are going to resonate, some won't. The ones that resonated one time may be a little distracting the next time. That's how meditation works. It's
Yeah,
in the
but
moment.
it's a standing offer that's
It
there
is.
every week, and
Yes.
it's totally free. Just a couple links to get registered. Would love to see you. And of course, you can always email us at consciouseyes108@gmail.com if there's any topics you would like to hear, questions that you may have, or stories that you'd like to share. We would love to
Yes.
hear from you. So
Yes.
thank you all for being
Okay.
here. Thank you, Savitri, for this conversation. Satnam.
Thank you, Robbie. Namaste.